The cart came to a stop at the mouth of Brickyard Lane just past midnight, and Nora Callum, Midwife's apprentice and Justice's daughter, watched from the narrow window above her wash basin as two men in unlaced shirts dragged something heavy out of the back and dropped it against the base of the alley wall like a sack of wet grain. The lane outside her door was where the borough market men left their broken barrels on Sunday nights. The shape was not a barrel. It did not move. The men did not look at each other. They climbed back onto the cart bench, and the wheels turned north toward the river, without a sound but the iron rims on wet stone. Nora counted to 15. Then she counted again. After the second count, she set down the forceps she had been cleaning. She did not yet know that the man slumped against the alley wall was the Earl of Ashmore, or that his own solicitor had paid for the laudanum in his drink, and the cart and the dumping. She knew only that a man left on his side in a wet lane could suffocate in his own coat collar if the collar was high enough, and the collar on this one was very high. She went down the back stair in her stockings. The door to the lane swelled in the damp the way it always did in October, and she forced it with her hip. She smelled spirits before she reached him, and under the spirits something else, sharp and faint, like the inside of a copper kettle held too long over the flame. She rolled him over with the heel of her boot, the way her mother had taught her to roll a man who might have swallowed his tongue. He was not small. His coat was good wool, the kind she had seen on the barristers who came to her father's courtroom, and someone had gone through his pockets with practised hands. His purse was gone. His watch chain hung cut at the fob, but a small notebook of pale green leather had slipped into the gap between his coat lining and his waistcoat, and whoever had searched him had not felt it there. She did not open the notebook yet. She went back inside for the linen rope she used to hang the drying sheets, looped it under his arms, and walked backward through her own doorway with her shoulders taking most of his weight. His heels knocked on the threshold. The wet from the lane came off him in dark smears across her kitchen flagstones. She got the door shut with her foot. She turned the bolt. She stood still and listened. The cart did not come back. She let out the breath she had been holding since the first count of 15. By the kitchen lamp she could see he was breathing. Barely. His pulse was there, slow and uneven, the way a pulse ran when the body was working harder than the man inside it knew. She had felt that pulse before, on the women she sat with in long labours. She knew how much ground it meant a person had already lost. The sharp smell was stronger now that he was inside. She knew laudanum from 3 years of her mother's practice, and she knew spirits, and she knew neither of them smelled like copper kettles. She had read enough of her father's case papers to know what did. She did not say the word aloud. She simply noted it and went to fill the kettle. His boots had cost more than her winter's rent. The buckles were silver, not pewter. She had grown up in a justice's house and spent 3 years in a midwife's rooms, and she knew the difference between a man who wore good clothes because he had saved for them and a man who wore them because he had never thought to count the cost. This was the second kind. Getting him up the stair took longer than she expected. She was not a large woman, but 3 years of turning breech berths and lifting women twice her size had left her with shoulders that knew their work. She got him up the 12 steps, one at a time, his weight braced against her side, and she laid him on the spare cot in the room off the landing, where her mother had once kept the overnight cases, the women who came in too far along to be moved home. The cot was narrow and he was not. He lay with one arm off the edge of it, and she left it there because moving it would have meant moving him, and she had already moved him enough. She sat back on her heels and looked at him in the lamplight. He was perhaps 30. His face was not relaxed the way sleep relaxed a face. The set of his jaw was still working at something even in unconsciousness, the way a man's jaw worked when he was angry and trying not to show it. His hair was dark and needed cutting. Someone had struck him across the left cheekbone at some point in the evening, not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough that the skin had purpled and begun to rise. She picked up the green notebook from her apron pocket where she had put it. She turned it in her hands for a long moment. Then she opened it. The pages were covered in the cramped, lateral shorthand her father used, in court, the kind that looked like fly tracks to anyone who had not grown up watching it fill a slate. But the hand was different, faster, more slanted, with a particular loop on the letter G that her father did not use. On the first page, beneath a date in November, a single line in plain script, E.H. Ashmore. In the matter of the Thornton receivership and what Claiborne knows, she closed the notebook. She set the bar across the landing door and wedged the kitchen chair under the handle of the back entrance and laid the fire poker within reach of the cot. Then she blew out the main lamp and sat down in the low chair by the window with the notebook in her apron and watched the lane. The fever came before dawn. She had expected it. Whatever had been in his cup was working its way out the only way the body knew. And by 3 a.m, he was sweating through the blanket she had put over him, and his skin was the temperature of the warming stones she kept for difficult deliveries. She changed the cloth on his forehead twice an hour. She got water past his lips with a small, curved spoon her mother had left her, the one shaped for infants, because it was the only shape that worked on a man too far under to swallow properly. He shifted under her hands. He did not open his eyes. Once, around 4, he said a name, clear and low and from somewhere deeper than the fever. He said Oliver. She did not know who Oliver was. She put her palm against his cheek to read the heat, said nothing back, and went on with the cloth. He said it once more before the grey came up against the lane window, and after the second time he was quiet. The fever broke near noon the next day. She knew the moment, the way the skin went from burning to damp, the way the breathing changed from shallow and fast to something longer and more considered, the way the jaw finally unclenched. She had watched it happen in women. After the worst of the labour was through, that particular giving way of the body, when it decided it was going to survive. She was at the work table when he opened his eyes. He lay still for a long moment, looking at the ceiling, the way a man looked at a ceiling, when he was deciding whether the ceiling was real. Then he turned his head and found her. His voice was rough from disuse and the remnants of whatever had been in his cup. But it was a composed voice, schooled and careful. He said, "Where am I?" She set down her pen. She walked to the cot and stood at the foot of it and looked at him steadily. She said, "A midwife's rooms in the Southwark borough. You were left in Brickyard Lane at midnight on Tuesday. It is Thursday afternoon." He closed his eyes. He opened them again. He said, "My name is," she said. "I know what your name is." He went still. She said, "I am not going to send for anyone you do not want sent for. I am going to ask you what was in your cup, because I need to know what I have been pulling out of you for the past 40 hours. He looked at her steadily. He said, "Laudanum, I think. Something beneath it that I couldn't identify," she said. "Copper sulfate, I believe. The smell of you on Tuesday night. You were not meant to wake up." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "How do you know the smell of copper sulfate?" She said, "My father is a magistrate's clerk. I grew up reading his case papers. I know the smell of most poisons the way a baker knows the smell of bad flour. You learn it by proximity and you do not forget it." Something shifted in his face. Not warmth exactly, more like the adjustment a man made when he revised a calculation. He said, "I had no purse on me when you found me." She said, "No, and no watch. You had a notebook." His expression did not change, but his hand moved, very slightly, toward his side. She said, "I have it. I read the first page. I can read court shorthand. My father wrote in it every evening for 20 years. She paused. "I am not going to use it against you. I want to know if the name on that page is the name on your card case, or a different name." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "Edmund Ashmore, that is my name. The one on the notebook and the one I was born with." She nodded once. She said, "I am Nora Callum. My mother was Eleanor Callum, who kept these rooms for 11 years. My father is James Callum, who clerked the Bow Street Rotation Court for 23. I have bread, and I have small beer, and I have cleaned your coat and left it on the chair by the window. You will eat what I bring you, and you will not attempt the stairs until I tell you the stairs are safe, and you will tell me who Claiborne is and what he knows. Is that understood?" He looked at her for a long time. He said, "Yes." She did not believe his yes entirely. She believed the part where he would stay in the cot, because his legs were not ready to take him anywhere, and she believed the part about eating, because he had not eaten in 2 days, and the body has its own opinions about that. She did not yet believe the part about Claiborne. She brought him the bread and the beer, and she watched him eat slowly, the way a man ate when his stomach was not yet sure it wanted company. and when he had finished she took the bowl back and sat in the low chair and looked at him. He said, "The name Oliver, did I say it?" She said, "Twice, before dawn on Wednesday." He was quiet. He said, "My brother, he died years ago, a fall from a horse on the Ashmore estate in Kent. The verdict was accidental." She said nothing. He said, "The notebook is a record of what I have been able to establish since I came back from abroad in the spring. I was in Portugal for 4 years after Oliver died. I came home in March. By April I knew the fall had not been a fall." She said, "And Claiborne," his jaw tightened. He said, "Neville, my family's solicitor for the better part of 30 years. He managed the Thornton receivership after my father died. A property dispute that left 2 families in ruin and Claiborne in a very comfortable position in Mayfair. Oliver found the discrepancy in the accounts. He was going to the court in the morning. He stopped. He never reached it," she said. "And you have been building a case." He said, "I have been trying to. The notebook is." He stopped again. 6 months of work. Statements I have not been able to formalize. Names I cannot yet place. And 2 nights ago I received a letter from Claiborne asking to meet at a private club in St. James to discuss a settlement offer in the Thornton matter. I went. I should not have gone," she said. "No, you should not." He looked at her. He said, "You are very frank," she said. "I am a midwife's apprentice. We do not have time to be otherwise." Something moved across his face then. Not quite a smile. Closer to the thing before a smile, when a person recognized the shape of a sentence they were going to remember. She said, "Rest. I will come back after the evening round." She did 3 births that October, and she came back to the rooms between them, and changed the cloth, and brought him soup when he could manage it, and sat in the low chair when she could not sleep. He was a contained man, she noticed. He did not speak without purpose. He did not ask her questions he didn't need the answers to. When she came in, he watched her hands rather than her face, the way people watched the hands of those they were trying to decide whether to trust. On the 3rd morning he was sitting up against the wall. His colour had come back, not fully, but enough. He said, "The notebook. Have you read all of it?" She said, "Yes," he said. "And..." She was quiet for a moment. She set the kettle back on the hook. She said, "You are missing a connection. Between the clerk Claiborne paid at the Thornton hearing and the man who certified your brother's death in Kent. You have their names separately. You do not have them in the same room." He stared at her. She said, "My father clerked that court. Not the Thornton receivership. He was on the criminal rotation. But he clerked with a man named Sable, who handled the civil side, and Sable was the one who sealed the Thornton accounts and recorded the final disbursement in a way my father said at the time was irregular. My father wrote it in his own diary because it troubled him and he did not know what to do with it. The diary is in the downstairs cabinet. I can show you the entry," he said. "You have read your father's diary," she said. "My father asked me to read it when he fell ill last winter. He said, in the event that anything should happen to him, he wanted someone who could read shorthand to know what was in it." She paused. "Nothing happened to him. He is in good health in Clapham. But I read it, and I remembered Sable's name because my father underlined it twice, and my father very seldom underlined anything." He was quiet for a long moment. He said, "I need that diary," she said. "I know. I have already written to my father asking him to confirm his recollection of the Sable entry. I sent the letter yesterday morning. While you are still feverish, he will answer within a day." He looked at her with an attention that was different from any attention he had turned on her before. He said, "You sent the letter before you knew whether I would live," she said. "I read the notebook on Tuesday night. You were going to live or you were not, and either way the notebook was going to matter." He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Who are you?" She said, "I told you, Nora Callum. My mother was a midwife. My father is a court clerk. I am somewhere between the two." She picked up the forceps from the work table. "I will go to my father's house this afternoon and get the diary. You will stay in the cot and you will not answer the door for any reason," he said. "And if Claiborne's men come," she said, "then they will knock on a locked door in a midwife's lane and assume the rooms are empty because I will take the lamp." She took the lamp. She took the diary. She came back before dark. Her father's entry on the Sable matter ran to 4 pages in the close shorthand, and it named not only the clerk but the coroner, who had certified the inquest on the Ashmore estate in Kent, a man named Pett, who had been on the civil court's recommended panel for 3 years, and whose appointment had been sponsored. Her father's diary noted with 2 underlines and a marginal asterisk by Neville Claiborne. She laid the diary on the cot blanket. He read it by the lamp, with his finger moving along the shorthand lines, and his face was a face that had learned not to show what was happening behind it. But she had spent the past 4 days watching his face, and she could see the place where the calculation landed. He said, "Pett." She said, "Yes." He said, "Pett is still practicing. He certified an inquest in Bermondsey 6 months ago. I saw the record." She said, "He can be found." He looked at her. He said, "Nora." It was the first time he had used her given name. She noted it the way she noted everything, quietly, without reacting, adding it to the column she was keeping. He said, "What I have in the notebook, and what your father's diary records, and what Pett can be made to confirm, that is a chain. But it is not yet a chain with all its links. I need the Thornton disbursement records. Claiborne has them. They will be in his chambers in Gray's Inn," she said. "I know someone who clerks at Gray's Inn." He went still. He said, "Who?" She said, "His name is Francis Dodd. He was my father's second clerk for 4 years before he took the Gray's Inn position. He is an honest man, and he has not liked Neville Claiborne since the Thornton matter went through, because he was the one who had to record the disbursement, the way Claiborne dictated it, and he knew at the time it was not right." She paused. "I delivered his daughter in September. He would do me a service if I asked." He said, "That is a dangerous thing to ask of him," she said. "I will ask him what he remembers, not what he can produce. Memory is not evidence the way a document is, but it will tell us whether the document exists and where." He said, "And if Claiborne finds out Dodd has spoken to you," she said, "then I will already have sent the chain to Bow Street, and Claiborne will have other things to concern himself with." She said it plainly, without drama, the way she said most things. "I will go to Dodd in the morning." Dodd met her in the anteroom of the Gray's Inn Chapel at 8 o'clock, and he stood with his hat in his hands. And he told her what he remembered about the Thornton disbursement in the careful, pained way an honest man described a thing he had been made to do against his conscience. He remembered the account reference. He remembered the name of the secondary ledger, where the true disbursement had been recorded before Claiborne had the first one altered. He remembered the alteration because Claiborne had made him witness the new entry, and he had gone home and been unable to eat his supper. He said, "The secondary ledger will still be there." Claiborne does not destroy things. He archives them. He believes nothing can be used against him. She said, "Francis, will you go before a magistrate and say what you have said to me?" He turned his hat once in his hands. He said, "My daughter is 3 months old." She said, "I know, I was there." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "Yes." She came back to the rooms to find Edmund sitting up at the edge of the cot with his coat on and his boots in his hand, attempting to put them on without admitting that his hands were still shaking from the remnants of the copper sulfate. She took the boots from him without comment and put them on the floor at his feet. She said, "Dodd will testify. He knows where the secondary ledger is. He believes it is still in Claiborne's archive room, 3rd cabinet from the window, the one without a label." Edmund looked at her steadily. He said, "That is 4 witnesses, Dodd, your father's diary, Pett if we can reach him, and whatever Crail's man put in the cup, which I imagine we can trace to a supplier if we have the right name." She said, "I have the right name. The man who purchased the copper sulfate from the dispensary in Cheapside used the name Holt. There is only one Holt in Claiborne's employ. His personal runner, a man named Thomas Holt, who has been with him 12 years. I know this because my father's diary mentions him twice in connection with the Thornton matter, always running between Claiborne and the courthouse." Edmund said, "How long have you known that?" She said, "Since Wednesday night, when I first read the diary entry." She paused. "I was waiting to tell you until you were coherent enough to hear it." He looked at her for a long time. He said, "You have been building this chain since Tuesday night," she said. "Someone had to," he said, "while sitting up with me." She said, "You were not very demanding company." "You slept mostly," he said. "I said Oliver's name." She said, "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. He said, Oliver was older than me by 6 years. He managed the estate from the time our father died. He was not a man who made enemies easily. He was careful and methodical, and he went over those Thornton accounts 3 times before he was certain, because he would not bring a charge against a man he had known all his life without being certain. He stopped. He was going to the court in the morning. Claiborne knew he was going. I did not find out until April from a letter Oliver had left with his steward in a sealed envelope to be opened in the event of his death. I had been in Portugal. I did not know the letter existed. She said, "What did the letter say?" He said, "It said that if anything happened to him, the Thornton discrepancy was where to look. It said Claiborne had approached him the week before to offer a private settlement. It said he had refused." He looked at the lamp. It said, "Tell Edmund to look at the horse," she said. "The horse," he said. The horse they said threw him was a mare he had ridden for 7 years. She had never thrown anyone. When I came back in March, she was still in the stable. I had her examined by the veterinary in Sevenoaks. He stopped. She had a sore on her left flank, healed over, small and deliberate, the kind made by a pin, in the place where the girth strap would press when the saddle was tightened. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Edmund." It was the first time she had used his name. She heard herself use it and did not apologize for it. She said, "I am going to write to Pet tonight. I am going to write the letter as a professional inquiry on my mother's headed paper. The midwifery practice still operates under her name and her license. I am going to ask Pet if he will confirm details of the Kent inquest for a matter of estate administration. That is not a lie. The estate is what this is about. If he answers in any detail, we will know whether he can be turned. If he does not answer, we will know he cannot, and we will approach him through Bow Street instead." Edmund said, "And if Claiborne has already heard that someone has been asking about the Thornton matter," she said, "then we have less time than I would like." She stood up from the low chair. "I will send the letter tonight. I will go to Bow Street in the morning, before Dodd does, so that I arrive as a private citizen with a private concern, and not as a woman attached to a peer who everyone in London will know disappeared 3 nights ago. It will go better if I arrive first," he said. "You would go alone?" She said, "My father's daughter walks into Bow Street alone. A midwife's apprentice walks into Bow Street alone. There is nothing remarkable about either of them." She picked up the lamp. "There is something very remarkable about an Earl of Ashmore walking into Bow Street after he has been reported missing by his housekeeper, and that remarkability will work against us until the chain is complete." He looked at her steadily. He said, "You have thought about all of this," she said. "I have had 4 nights." She sent the letter to Pet. She went to Bow Street in the morning. She spoke to the duty magistrate, a man named Carr, who had clerked alongside her father for 2 years before his appointment, and who listened to her account with the quality of attention that distinguished magistrates who had once been clerks from those who had not. She laid the diary entry in front of him. She named Dodd. She named Holt. She named the dispensary in Cheapside, and the purchase of copper sulfate on the 14th of October. Carr read the diary entry twice. He said, "Mrs. Callum." She said, "Miss Callum." He looked up. He said, "Miss Callum, where is Lord Ashmore?" She said, "Alive and recovering, and prepared to give his account in full before your bench as soon as you can convene it." Carr looked at her for a long moment. He said, "I will have a runner at Claiborne's chambers in Gray's Inn within the hour for the secondary ledger. I would like his lordship here by noon," she said. "He will be here by 11. She went back to the rooms and told Edmund to get his coat on properly this time. He came to Bow Street at 11, on foot, through the back passage from the Strand the way she had told him, and she met him at the side entrance, and they went in together through the clerk's door and not the public hall. Carr was waiting in the side room with Dodd and the secondary ledger, which the runner had retrieved from Claiborne's third cabinet from the window without difficulty, because Claiborne had been in his club when the runner arrived and had not returned before they left. Pet had answered her letter that morning. The answer was a single line. "I will say what I know at any bench you put me in front of, and I have been waiting 2 years for someone to ask." He arrived at Bow Street at 11:30, with his coat buttoned and his hat under his arm, and the expression of a man who had been carrying something for a very long time and had finally been offered somewhere to set it down. The hearing began at noon. Dodd took the stand first. Dodd gave his name, his position, the date of the Thornton disbursement, the discrepancy, the alteration, the name of the secondary ledger, and the cabinet in which it had been kept. He produced from his breast pocket a dated memorandum in his own hand, written the evening of the alteration, and kept in his desk for 2 years because he had not known what else to do with it. Carr read it. Carr admitted it. Pett took the stand. Pett gave his name and his panel appointment, and the date of the Kent inquest, and the condition of the site when he had arrived. He said that the injury to Oliver Ashmore's head had been consistent with a fall, but that the injury to Oliver Ashmore's shoulder had not, and that he had been told by Claiborne's representative, a man he had identified later as Holt, before the inquest opened, that the family wished for a clean verdict and would be grateful for one. He said he had given the clean verdict. He said he had not slept well in 2 years. Holt was brought in under a runner's hand. Holt was a man of 51, who had spent 12 years doing Claiborne's private work, and who had been presented that morning with Dodd's memorandum and Pett's advance statement, and who had spent the 40 minutes since his arrival deciding what to do about it. He chose in the end to speak. He named himself. He named Claiborne. He named the dispensary. He named the 14th of October and the purchase and the delivery to the club in St. James, to the private room on the 2nd floor, where the cup had been prepared before Lord Ashmore arrived. Edmund took the stand last. He gave his name and his title and the night of the 14th. He named the letter from Claiborne. He named the club. He named the cup and the cart and the lane. He named the rooms in the borough and the woman who had found him, and the 4 days and the notebook and the diary in the downstairs cabinet. He named his brother in the snow on the Ashmore estate in Kent 2 years ago, and the letter from the steward, and the horse in the stable with the healed mark on her flank. He named the 4 months he had spent in the notebook since his return from Portugal. He named Nora Callum. He named her as the woman who had built the chain while he was unconscious. The public bench was not full. It was a private hearing, not a public one. But the clerks' gallery was not empty. The Gray's Inn clerks' community was smaller than people supposed, and word had moved through it since Dodd left for Bow Street that morning, and there were 12 men in the gallery who had clerked in the same orbit as Neville Claiborne for 20 years, and who sat very still while Holt named the cup in the St. James Club. Claiborne arrived at Bow Street at 1:30, in a very good coat with his own solicitor, in the expectation of a collegial conversation with the duty magistrate about a missing peer. He was not prepared for the secondary ledger on the table, or for Dodd's memorandum, or for the bench already seated, or for Neville Pett in the witness corridor in his buttoned coat. He was not prepared for Edmund Ashmore, standing at the front of the room in his own proper clothes, alive, with no visible effect of the copper sulfate remaining, except perhaps a careful steadiness in the way he stood, as though he had decided beforehand exactly how much room he was going to take up, and was going to take exactly that much and no more. Claiborne's solicitor attempted an objection. He said that the testimony of a midwife's apprentice could not be admitted as the chain of evidence on which a matter of this gravity rested, and that Miss Callum's account was that of a tradesperson with no standing and could not be corroborated by the notebook of the interested party. Carr looked at Nora. He said, "Miss Callum." She stood up. She had no notes. She had set what she intended to say in her head the night before, the way she set the instruments before a birth, in the order she would need them, not the order that looked most impressive laid out on a table. She looked across the room at Neville Claiborne in his very good coat. She said, "You sent Thomas Holt to a dispensary in Cheapside. He purchased copper sulfate under the name of Holt and had it delivered to a private room in St. James. You prepared a cup for a man whose brother your accounts killed, and you left him in Brickyard Lane to drown in the October rain." She paused. "He did not drown. He was found by a woman who reads court shorthand and keeps her mother's diary in the downstairs cabinet, and everything you archived to protect yourself has been in Magistrate Carr's hands since this morning." She sat down. Claiborne's solicitor did not speak again. Carr looked at the bench and then at Claiborne and said, without raising his voice, that Neville Claiborne was held on the charges of the murder of Oliver Ashmore, the attempted murder of Edmund Ashmore, the corruption of a sworn inquest officer, and the falsification of court records in the matter of the Thornton receivership, and that the case was committed to the King's Bench for the winter sessions. The runner went up the aisle to take him. Claiborne did not resist. He looked across the room at Edmund for a long moment, and then the runner had his arm, and he went out the side door, and Nora did not see him in any room she occupied again. The bench rose. The clerk's gallery emptied. Nora sat on the front bench with her mother's headed paper still folded in her coat pocket, and her hands flat on her knees, and let the tension out of her shoulders for the first time in 6 days. Edmund sat down beside her. He did not speak immediately. He had said everything in the witness room, and he was a man who did not repeat himself. He sat with his hands on his own knees and looked at the empty magistrate's bench for a long time. After a while he said, "Nora," she said. "Yes," he said. "I need to tell you something, and I need to tell it to you now before we walk out of this building, because once we walk out it will become the kind of thing I will find a reason not to say for the next several months." She waited. He said, "I sent for my steward this morning, before we came to Bow Street. I asked him to see that the rooms in the borough are paid for through the spring, so that the practice can continue without interruption while you determine where you want to work from next. I sent for my solicitor as well, not Claiborne, a different man, one I have trusted since Portugal, and I asked him to look into the question of how a midwife's rooms might be properly licensed in a location rather less exposed than a back lane off the borough market." He stopped. "That is the practical thing I have done." She looked at him, she said, "And the impractical thing?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I am not going to say it in the way I mean it, because I do not yet have the words for it in the way I mean it, and I would rather not say it wrong than say it now in a form that does not fit. But I want you to know that the wrong word is not the reason I am not saying it. The wrong time is also not the reason. The reason is that I have spent 4 months building a case on facts that could be checked and verified and set in a proper sequence. And this is not a fact that can be checked and verified, and I do not yet know how to present it properly." She said, "You are a very precise man." He said, "I am trying to be less so," she said. "I know." He looked at her. He said, "Oliver used to tell me that I argued like a barrister and felt like a monk, and that one day I would meet someone who would make both habits impossible." He paused. I thought he was unkind when he said it. She said, "And now," he said, "and now I am sitting in Bow Street, having been dragged out of an alley by a woman who read my notebook before she knew my name, and Oliver seems considerably less unkind in retrospect." The corner of her mouth moved. She said, "I read the first page only. On Tuesday night." He said, "And the rest?" She said, "Wednesday, when you were still feverish." He said, "That is very thorough." She said, "I am a midwife's apprentice. We are always thorough." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Come home with me." I mean. He stopped, which was remarkable for a man who did not stop easily. He said, "My housekeeper has been in a state of considerable distress since Tuesday night. My steward has been managing the house by instinct. The rooms at Ashmore Square have 17 people in them who do not know whether their employer is alive. I am going home, and I would like you to come, because the alternative is going home to 17 people who will all want to speak at once, and I have found in the past 6 days that I can think more clearly when you are in the room." She said, "That is a very impractical reason to bring a woman home." He said, "I believe I mentioned I am trying to be less precise." She looked at him for a moment. She thought of the rooms in the borough, and the spare cot that was too narrow, and the lamp she had taken when she went to her father's house, and the low chair by the window where she had sat for 4 nights listening to the lane. She thought of the 2 nights she had not slept at all, and the 2 she had slept an hour, and the morning she had gone to Dodd in the anteroom of the Gray's Inn chapel and asked an honest man to do a frightening thing, and he had said yes because she had been there when his daughter was born. She thought of Oliver Ashmore, who had gone over the accounts 3 times because he would not bring a charge against a man he had known all his life without being certain. She thought of the word Edmund had said in his sleep. She had not told him she had thought about that word, and what it meant, and what it cost to say a name only in the dark. She said, "I will come for this evening." He said, "Yes." She said, "I will go back to the rooms in the morning." "The Dodd baby has a follow visit," he said. "Of course," she said, and the press of the rooms and the license and all of that. I will think about it, not decide. Think, he said. That is all I asked. She said, is it? He looked at her. He said, no, it is not. But it is what I said, and I mean to keep what I say. She stood up. She picked up her coat from the bench. She said, you said you wanted to be less precise. That was fairly precise. He stood. He said, I am working on it. They went out through the clerk's door and into the cool October air of Bow Street, and she turned her collar up, and he fell into step beside her, a pace that matched hers without her having to adjust. She noticed that. She noticed it the way she noticed the things that mattered, quietly, without making a show of it, adding it to the column she kept. 14 months passed. In the December of the following year, the south study of Ashmore Square had a fire in the grate that had not been permitted to go out since October, when the cold had come early. Nora Ashmore, Countess of Ashmore, which she was still in the process of finding the right relationship with, was at the writing desk beside the window, going over the licensing application for the new rooms in Holborn. The Holborn location had been her own choice, after 3 months of thinking and 1 month of deciding. It was 3 streets from a charity hospital, which was the point, and it had a proper front entrance and a back entrance, and 2 rooms that could serve as overnights for the difficult cases, and a small office where her records could be kept in something better than her mother's wooden cabinet. The practice still ran under Eleanor Callum's name. Nora had kept it that way. Her mother had built the name over 11 years, and her mother was in Clapham in good health and had opinions about the Holborn application that she sent in letters every other week. Nora kept the letters in the desk drawer alongside the Bow Street hearing notes and the copy of Dodd's memorandum that Carr had sent to her after the King's Bench verdict, because he had thought she ought to have it. The verdict had come in the October sessions. Claiborne had been convicted on all counts. The sentence had been transportation, commuted from the capital charge on account of his age, and he had sailed from Deptford in November on a ship whose name Nora had looked up, and then decided she did not need to remember. Holt had been given a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony, and had gone to live with a sister in Norwich. Pett had not been charged. Carr had judged that his complicity, which was real, was also the complicity of a man who had been afraid, and that making an example of the afraid was not the same as making an example of the guilty. Pett had written to Nora after the verdict, a letter of 2 pages, careful and honest, which she had kept. The Thornton receivership had been reopened. It was still being sorted through by the courts. The 2 families who had been ruined by it were not yet made whole, but they were closer than they had been, and Edmund's solicitor was the one managing it, and he was not a man who left things at closer. Francis Dodd had been offered a senior clerkship at the King's Bench following the hearing. He had taken it. He brought his daughter to the rooms in the borough for her 4-month visit on a Tuesday in February, and he had stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands and said that he was glad he had said yes, and Nora had said she was glad he had said yes too. Oliver Ashmore's grave in the Kent churchyard had a new stone, laid in the spring on what would have been his 37th birthday. Edmund had written the inscription himself. It read, Oliver James Ashmore. He went over the accounts 3 times. Below the inscription, in smaller letters, his brother knew. Nora had read it standing in the churchyard in April, with the Kent wind coming off the downs, and she had put a hand on Edmund's arm, and neither of them had said anything for a long time, which was the right amount to say. In the study at Ashmore Square, by the fire that was not permitted to go out, Edmund came in from the hall with his coat still on and a letter in his hand, and stopped in the doorway and looked at her at the desk. She said, without looking up from the licensing application. Well, he said, the Holborn Committee has approved the application. She set down her pen. He said, full licence, 2 overnight rooms. The charity hospital connection is conditional on a quarterly review, which they would like you to conduct yourself. She said, that is acceptable. He said, Nora. She looked up. He said, I have been trying for 14 months to find the words in the form that fits. I told you in Bow Street that the wrong form was the reason, not the wrong time, and I have been going over it the way Oliver went over the accounts 3 times, and then again, and I think I have it now. She waited. He said, you read my notebook before you knew my name. You built the chain while I was unconscious. You went to Bow Street alone. and you went to Dodd alone, and you wrote to Pet alone. And when I said I wanted you to come home with me, you said for this evening, and you meant it. And you went back to the Borough in the morning for the baby's follow visit, and I understood then what I had not understood before, which is that you will always go back for the follow visit, and that this is not a thing I want to change or persuade you away from or make room for. This is the room. This is the whole of what I am trying to say. He stopped. You are the room. She looked at him for a long moment. She had thought, in the months since the hearing, about what she had told herself that first night in the low chair by the window. That she was a midwife's apprentice and a justice's daughter, and that she knew how to read a case, and how to sit with people through the worst hours, and how to be useful and careful and present. And that those were the things she had, and they were enough. She had thought she was keeping herself honest by keeping that list. She had not understood until later that the list was also the thing he was describing when he could not find the words. She said, "You are a very precise man," he said. "I told you I was working on it," she said. "You are precise in the right directions." He came across the room and sat in the chair beside the desk, the low one, the one that had been there since she had asked for something to work from, and he had had it moved from the morning room, because the morning room chair was the right height, and he thought she should have the right height. He sat in it and looked at her, and she turned in her chair to look back, and the fire in the grate was the fire that was not permitted to go out, and the licensing application was on the desk, with the approval already in his hand, and outside the window the December cold was doing what December cold did. And it did not reach them, she said. "From here," he said, "from here." He did not reach for her hand first. He laid his own on the arm of the chair, open, and after a moment she put hers into it, and his fingers closed the way. A careful man closed a thing he intended to keep. In the Borough, in the rooms that were still Eleanor Callum's rooms, and would be for another 2 months, until the Holborn licence took effect. The spare cot stood against the wall of the overnight room with a clean blanket on it, and the lamp in the window, and the door at street level bolted in the way Nora had bolted it every night for 11 years of her mother's practice and 3 of her own. The lane outside was quiet. The rope for the drying sheets hung on its hook inside the back entrance. The case papers in the downstairs cabinet were in order, as they always were, as she had always kept them. Her mother's in the left drawer, her own in the right, her father's diary in the centre, where it had lived since the day she had brought it home from Clapham and decided it should be somewhere that could be reached quickly, in the event that it was ever needed. It had been needed once. She thought it might be needed again. The Borough was the Borough, and honest men wrote things in diaries, and lanes had mouths, and not all the carts that stopped in them stopped at accidents. She would be ready.